of course, speaking in the Israeli Knesset. These are live pictures. He's speaking in Hebrew at the moment. If we can get translation, we'll bring you some of what Prime Minister Netanyahu was saying. Has confirmed that the head of Hamas, Mohammed Sinwar, has been eliminated, is the word that's being used. It's a strike that's being reported on Gaza earlier this month that perhaps is the moment where Sinwar was killed. The strike, allegedly a huge strike, according to reporting from Channel 12, on a tunnel in Khan Yunis. This is reporting coming to me here from the Times of Israel that happened on the 13th of May, believed to have been the moment. Let's just pause for a moment because you can see tensions very high in the Israeli Knesset. Unfortunately, we don't have Hebrew translation, but we'll get some detail for exactly what has happened there. Prime Minister Netanyahu, as you can see, sitting there, flanked by his coalition. I can see Ben Gvir, his security minister, also sitting there in the Knesset listening to Prime Minister Netanyahu speak. I'm very pleased to say that we can go to the Middle East now and bring in our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, for the very latest on this. And Ali, as we're watching these pictures of tempers seriously fraying in the Knesset, I wonder if you can give us an idea, if you have any detail of the reporting as to exactly what happened just then and what Prime Minister Netanyahu has said, as we see a former PM Yair Lapid taking to the lectern and addressing the members there.
Well, you'll see the yellow sticker on his chest with the number 600 on it. Today is the 600th day since October the 7th. So emotions are running pretty high, particularly amongst the hostage families. 58 hostages still being held inside Gaza. At least 20, possibly 23 of them thought to still be alive. And I suspect, I haven't got it confirmed, I suspect what we saw was someone from the hostage families or the group that represents the hostage families, so there are multiple groups, protesting against the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and arguing for him to do a ceasefire deal to get the hostages out. It's not uncommon here to see sessions in the Knesset or other parliamentary committee sessions interrupted by protesters who are angry at the way the Israeli government are conducting the war in Gaza and angry that a new deal has not been agreed to free those hostages. So I suspect that was what that was all about. But the reports that coming from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that Mohammed Sinwar has been killed. Now, the IDF carried out massive series of airstrikes on the European hospital in Gaza a couple of weeks ago. They believed they had intelligence that Mohammed Sinwar was in the tunnels underneath that hospital, and they think that that was a moment that he wasn't close to any of the hostages, and so they took that opportunity to carry out a huge series of airstrikes, but there had been no confirmation whether or not they had got Mohammed Sinwar. Obviously, getting kind of any confirmation is pretty difficult because they cannot get IDF soldiers to the scene, and so they, and I'm speculating here, would have had to have relied on things possibly like communications intercepts to try and determine whether or not Hamas communications were indicating that Sinwar was dead. Now, if what Benjamin Netanyahu has said is accurate, and the only reason I caveat that is because there's been no official release from the Prime Minister's office, no official statement from the Israeli military. But if Mohammed Sinwar has been killed by the IDF, then that is very significant. Mohammed Sinwar was the brother of Yahya Sinwar. Yahya Sinwar killed at the end of towards the end of last year. He was the leader of Hamas. He was the mastermind behind October the 7th, and he was succeeded as the leader of Hamas in Gaza, at least, by his brother. his brother's, he was never quite the figure that Yahya was, but, he became the senior figure for Hamas in Gaza over the last 6 or 7 months. He would have been the point man, the main kind of decision maker for Hamas within Gaza when it came to any ceasefire negotiations. It was said that he was pretty stubborn. There were reports that often it was Mohammed Sinwar who would put in sort of late demands or try to change the terms of any ceasefire agreement. And so the hope has been here, at least, that if Mohammed Sinwar was eliminated, then not only would it further degrade Hamas's command structure, which already is in absolute tatters, but it also might remove an individual who had blocked some of the negotiations to try and reach a truce. So we'll see whether or not that materialises. There are lots of rumours around at the moment about a potential ceasefire being close. I have to say, every time it seems as though there might have been movement in that direction, that it hasn't actually gone anywhere. It tends to be the Israelis, but also actually, in fairness, backed by the Americans, saying that Hamas are not agreeing to the deal that is on the table. But the elimination of Mohammed Sinwar would be another success for the Israeli military, as they're looking to not just decapitate the Hamas leadership, but completely dismantle Hamas's ability to operate and function as a military force within Gaza, and also as a political force within Gaza.
Yeah, all right, Ali, for now in Jerusalem, thank you for that. Well, our security and defence analyst, Professor Michael Clark, is here with us. Professor Clark, great to have you with us on this. I mean, Ali's final point there, I think it is really important to linger on. It's not only that one of the war aims for Benjamin Netanyahu was to destroy Hamas militarily, but also destroy them politically. And if it is confirmed that Mohammed Sinwar has been killed, that will be just the latest of the leadership killed. Let's not forget, Yahya Sinwar's brother was killed back in October. Mohammed Daif was killed as well, and Ismail Haniyeh was also killed. So it would appear as if many of the top-level leaders now from Hamas have been killed by the Israelis.
Yeah, I mean, they got the top three. Haniyeh, who was in Doha, Yahya Sinwar, who was the political leader in Gaza, and Mohammed Daif, who was the military leader. And so they got those three. Then it devolved naturally on Mohammed Sinwar, the younger brother. And as Alistair said, I mean, not as prominent, different sort of character, though the Israelis had been after him for a long time and they'd imprisoned him in the past and released him and so on. He was always a dead man walking, and they know that. The Israelis said a couple of weeks ago when they bombed the European hospital with a lot of, I can't remember off the top of my head how many civilian casualties, but it was a lot, that they thought they'd got him. Because if they're going for one of the top leaders, then they stop calculating how many civilian casualties may be involved. They do actually have a sort of tariff for the civilian casualties they would regard as acceptable, depending on the Hamas person they're going for. When it comes to one of the top leaders, there seems to be no tariff. They just go for them where they think they've got them, because they're making the point that they are dismantling Hamas from the top down, and they can argue that they've done that. In reality, I mean, they've destroyed Hamas as a military organisation about a year ago, but they can't destroy it as a political entity, and they can't break its hold, even though it's a hold achieved by terror, over the Palestinians of Gaza, and they just can't seem to do that. The other thing that's interesting about this, I suspect, is the timing of it. I mean, Netanyahu said 2 weeks ago, we think we've got him. The fact that they've said now, he confirms it, well, will be interesting to see what sort of evidence they got. Maybe they got some DNA, because that's the most important. And sometimes they can get that from agents on the ground, people who are working within the population. That's the thing that matters. But the fact that he said now is part, I think, or I'm guessing, is the political issue of saying, look, our offensive in Gaza is working. Our offensive in Gaza is important. We are doing this. We are working to destroy Hamas completely, because in Israel itself, the opposition to this new offensive, the danger it puts the hostages in, is getting tougher and tougher for the government to live with. So the timing of this announcement, it might be coincidence, but if it isn't, it's helpful to Netanyahu to be able to say now, oh yeah, we did get Mohammed Sinwar. You know, we can prove it.
Yeah, it was on the 13th of May when that huge strike on the European hospital happened, and it was reported that 28 people were killed in that attack and dozens injured. I mean, the offensive in Gaza has intensified in recent days and weeks as the Israelis seek to entirely eliminate Hamas as a fighting force and as a political entity. to what level have they been able to achieve that? To what level can they achieve that? Because the thing that has always talked about this, Michael, is that you can kill all the leadership, you can try and destroy as many of the fighters as you want, but for many people, that idea of resistance through Hamas is an ideology, and it's almost impossible to destroy that.
And it's not that the Palestinians of Gaza seemed incredibly loyal to Hamas. It's just that Hamas are in control. They keep control by brutal terror, and I really mean brutal terror. Anyone who opposes them, anyone who has led these marches in protest at Hamas and what they've brought the Gazans to, they pick up the leaders and they torture them to death and they throw their bodies in front of their families so that they can see what happens. I mean, absolutely brutal. But the fact is, until the Israelis and or the international community or the community of the Middle East, until they come up with an alternative for the political future of Gaza, then Hamas is the default option. And there's nothing that the 2 million Gazans can really do about that, because they're not powerful enough as civilians to take on these wicked terrorists. And so that's the biggest issue, or the biggest problem, is that here we are 20 months into this war. The Israelis have been fighting it for 19 months, 20 months since the original atrocity that Hamas committed. And still, there is no credible plan for the day after. There's no credible plan for a future of Gaza without Hamas. There's a couple of plans that have been floated, and they just disappear because nobody in the Israeli government is really committed to them. And the international community doesn't believe that the Israeli government is committed to them, so nothing happens. And I've seen the plan, we've all seen the plan come around a couple of times, of a technocratic government elected from local individuals with filtering to keep Hamas people out of it. Yeah, it's there on paper, but nobody's ever committed to doing anything about it or really trying to make it stick. And the people who can pay for that plan, the Gulf Arab states, won't commit themselves until they think the plan is workable.
Well, there's another part of the plan within some of these in the Israeli coalition as well to repopulate Gaza with Israelis.
Exactly, and the military operations going on now is caught between two things. We're trying to work out what it is. The IDF look as if they're going to conduct a classic counterinsurgency operation. So they're going to divide Gaza up into zones. They're going to move the population out of these zones and then clear Hamas from them. That's what they say they're going to do. There's a sort of counterinsurgency logic to that, but a lot in the Israeli government say, oh no, this is the reoccupation of Gaza and we'll recolonize it with settlers. That's completely different to what the IDF want. Can the IDF do it? Yes, they could, but they'll have to stay there in force indefinitely. It'll soak up the whole army and the reservists for a long time if they're going to sit on Gaza with 2 million really distressed and angry people.
Absolutely. All right, Michael, for now, appreciate the analysis as always. Let's go back to Ali, who's in Jerusalem for us. And Ali, look, from what Michael was saying there, are we any clearer now if this is fully confirmed that this is Mohammed Sinwar who was killed, as to what that means next for the Israeli offensive within Gaza, as the war aim was to destroy Hamas and return the hostages? Is there any sense that that will be the end of the destroying of Hamas by killing another leader, or will the offensive go on?
I mean, the offensive will go on. So I'm checking my phone for messages from the Israeli military who are calling right now. So I'll see what they have to say when we get off air and whether they can also confirm this news. The offensive will go on, at least until such point that there is an agreement reached to come to a ceasefire. But, you know, as I say, we wait to see whether Mohammed Sinwar has been killed. There have been reports as well that he was there with a guy called Mohammed Shabada, who was the commander of the Rafah brigade and probably would have been Mohammed Sinwar's successor. And so if he's dead as well, they've not just taken out the leader, but they've probably taken out the next in line. And so, you know, what it is it's that systematic elimination of all the senior commanders. I think, you know, if Shabana is dead as well as Mohammed Sinwar, then that would leave only one of Hamas's kind of senior military commanders from October the 7th still alive. That's Azzeddin al-Haddada, who is the commander of the Gaza City Brigade, and my guess would be that he might be next in line to take over from Mohammed Sinwar. But, you know, the point is that, you know, you eliminate these guys one by one, and although groups like Hamas can regenerate fighters, you know, with some sort of relative ease, it's much harder to replace senior commanders who have battle experience, who have seniority, who have respect within the system. That is not so easy to do, and that is how you can bring about the collapse of Hamas as a fighting force, which they are pretty much collapsed. Even though the IDF is in Gaza in very, very large numbers, there's very little fighting going on. Hamas are still capable of firing the occasional rocket into Israel, but very few indeed. Nobody that I've ever spoken to within the IDF and senior officers within the IDF believes that Hamas is in any way capable of carrying out another October the 7th. Massacre again, but the question for the IDF, or at least the task that they've been set by the Israeli government, is to ensure that not just that Hamas can't carry out another October the 7th, but Hamas cannot fight at all, that they are completely de-armed, demilitarized. And so that is the task that the IDF is trying to undertake at the moment. Some people question the wisdom of that. But yeah, the killing of Mohammed Sinwar and perhaps other senior commanders who might have been in that tunnel with him would be a coup for the IDF.
Welcome back. Let's take you to the United Nations in New York. Danny Danon, the Israeli representative to the United Nations, is speaking. Let's take a listen.
Strength and responsibility, even in the face of lies. We are facilitating humanitarian aid into Gaza through two mechanisms: the existing track crossings and a new system created in coordination with the US and international partners. Since May 19, almost 9,000 tons of aid have entered Gaza, carrying food, medical supplies, and shelter equipment. In the past 2 weeks, 4 new aid distribution centers were established inside Gaza. 2 of them are already open. Those centers distribute food packages to thousands of families, despite Hamas establishing roadblocks and checkpoints to prevent civilians from reaching the aid. As we speak, there are more than 400 trucks already on the Gaza side of the fence, waiting to be distributed, but the UN has failed to pick them up. We opened the crossings, we provided safe routes for those trucks, but the UN did not show up. So let me be clear, the UN must stop spreading panic and start moving aid. Put your ego aside, pick up the aid, and do your job. Finally, as negotiations for the release of the hostages continue, the facts remain. Israel accepted the most recent deal, Hamas rejected it. We will not stop defending our people. We will not abandon our hostages who have been held for 600 days now. We will not apologize for fighting back against terror. Thank you.
Ambassador, hi, thank you very much. Yvonne Moriarty, News. Israel's losing support amongst European allies. Your own former Prime Minister has accused Israel of carrying out war crimes. There are hostage families protesting on the streets of Tel Aviv. Are you feeling the pressure now to stop bombing the people of Gaza?
Well, we are not bombing the people of Gaza. We are fighting a terrorist organization. And as I said very clearly, we have 2 goals in this war. We haven't finished the job. We will not finish the war leaving behind 58 people. There are families waiting for them, and we are committed to finish this war by making sure the hostages are back and Hamas is out of the game.
Ambassador, with China Central Television, my question is on West Bank. You said many times here that Israel is the state of democracy and rule of law, and this is what exactly happened with our Chinese colleague in West Bank last weekend during what many people call Jerusalem Day. His equipment has been damaged and he has been verbally discriminatively abused. Can you explain a little bit what kind of rule of law is this, especially the law enforcement, when they saw those kind of things, they left?
So I cannot relate to what you are showing me, but I would appreciate if you send me the information, and we were going to look into this incident. But we are a democracy, and we are proud of it.
But should the police protect journalists there?
So there is freedom for journalists in Israel, and we have seen it all over the years. If there was an incident, we will look into that.
Mr. Ambassador, Mary with the Associated Press. Can you talk The UN says 47 were wounded, apparently by Israeli fire. Gaza Health Ministry says 48 wounded, 1 killed. What happened yesterday?
So first, let me make it clear. We don't run those centers. We provide security for the surrounding area. As for yesterday, it was the first day. There were a few riots. It took the American teams some time to take control of the situation. But I can say it out loud. We didn't shoot anyone over there. There were reports about helicopters shooting people and those kind of things. It didn't happen.
Not even warning shots?
No, not by us. Not by us.
Ambassador Kristen Salumi from Al Jazeera in English. One of the speakers we're expecting to hear from at the meeting today is an American surgeon who's been in Gaza and has written and spoken publicly about his experience there, saying that he witnessed children deliberately targeted and shot, often in the head, during the ceasefire even. How would you respond to the allegations that he's raised that Israeli soldiers have been taking the lives deliberately of children there?
So I will listen to his words. I think it's important to bring briefers from both sides. We have asked that there will be briefer that will speak about our suffering. Unfortunately, it will not happen today. I hope it will be more balanced in the future meetings. But I agree with you. There is suffering in Gaza, but the blame is on the shoulders of Hamas. Hamas that started the war, and Hamas that is not willing to lay down their weapons and release the hostages. So there will continue to be suffering until Hamas will understand that they will not stay in Gaza. Yes, please.
One more question. Now that the Gaza humanitarian coalition is up and running, is Israel planning to still allow the UN to deliver aid into Gaza, or will you make parliamentary?
So at this stage, we have both tracks. I call it the old one, which is the tracks, and the UN should move faster and be more helpful on this issue. They complain a lot, and they should be more cooperative. And at the same time, there is I would call it the US centers. But I think the problem is that some people look at it as a competition, and I think it shouldn't be the case. I think the UN should put their ego aside and cooperate with the new mechanism as well.
And then can I just clarify your remarks on John Fletcher? Are you blaming him for the deaths of the 2 embassy staff in DC?
So I think he is responsible for inflaming the situation, and I will elaborate on that. First, he came to the Security Council and used the term genocide. That was irresponsible. That was not his role, no legal claim for that. Then he continued and blamed us for killing 14,000 Palestinian babies, which was a lie. It didn't happen. And only 2 days ago, he put out another provocation saying that there are 10,000 trucks waiting to enter Gaza. That's another provocation. If you line up 10,000 trucks from the border with Gaza, it will actually be a line until the border with Lebanon. From where he's bringing those numbers? He should be more responsible when he puts out those statements. Thank you very much.
Well, as you can see, Danny Danon there stepping away from the lectern in the United Nations in New York. A short news conference there given by Mr. Danon as he sought to explain the amount of aid that he says the Israelis have delivered into Gaza in the past few days, claiming that since the 19th of May, 9,000 tons of aid have gone in. 4 distribution sites have been established, and 2 of which have opened. He also claimed that Israel has accepted the most recent ceasefire deal, but Hamas had rejected it. And when a question was put to him about the intensification of the Israeli offensive in recent days in Gaza, he claimed that Israel was not bombing Gaza, it was bombing terrorists. Our Middle East correspondent, Asda Bunkel, was listening into some of that and joins us now live. So, look, Ali, we didn't get the whole of that news conference. It doesn't seem as if Mr. Danon was asked about Mohammed Sinwar that we were reporting just earlier last hour, that his death may well have been confirmed, but rather talking about the humanitarian situation and the fact that those distribution centres have been set up, and that he said that despite the reporting that at least 1 person was shot and 48 people injured at one of those humanitarian centres, Mr. Danon's saying that the Israelis did not shoot anyone yesterday.
Well, there were gunshots. We can hear that on the video. The IDF say they were warning shots fired in the air above the people in order to regain control of the crowds. And certainly control was regained at some point afterwards. And there have been reports from within Gaza and the United Nations actually as well, saying that 48 people were injured. So there is, as is often the case, a disagreement there about what exactly happened. I should say we have not seen pictures or a large number of pictures of people wounded from gunfire yesterday. So I think that's just worth adding to that. He was obviously questioned as well about the intensification of Israel's military campaign in Gaza, saying that they're targeting Hamas, they're not targeting civilians. That, might be the case, but we have also seen over the last few weeks very clearly a huge civilian death toll and many wounded as a result of Israeli airstrikes. And what we haven't seen or heard from the IDF is proof when they have said that they were targeting Hamas command centers, for example. They've not issued any evidence to prove that claim either. So again, a major difference of agreement between Israel, the United Nations, and some of its allies. Mohammed Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza, the younger brother of Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind of the October the 7th attacks, widely believed to have been killed in major airstrikes on the European hospital earlier this month, but now it's been confirmed by Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's Prime Minister, in the Knesset about an hour or so ago. We don't know how they have come to that conclusion. It could be human intelligence on the ground. It could be the intercept of communications from Hamas, but would be a significant moment in this war. Not as significant as when they killed Yahya Sinwar. Mohammed Sinwar was not quite that kind of sort of influential figure within Hamas, but he was a successor as a leader of Hamas, and the Israeli military has successfully eliminated most of Hamas's senior military leadership one by one, and this would be another step towards decapitating its command structure.
Okay. So, thank you for that. Let's now bring in, if we can, Seth Frantzman, who is a Middle East correspondent at the Jerusalem Post. Seth, thanks so much for joining us. I think when we booked you, we didn't know that Danny Danon was going to pop up, so we'll talk a little bit about that as well afterwards. But my first question really is about the news that we had about 40 minutes ago, this announcement that Mohammed Sinwar has been eliminated. Is there expectation, do you think, soon that there'll be confirmation of that killing?
Yeah, I think there's much confirmation as possible. I mean, he was apparently killed in some sort of an underground facility or a bunker. So if they can get some sort of DNA or something like that. And I think it was widely expected over the last, week and a half or so that basically, he had been eliminated and that he was out of the picture now. I guess it remains to be seen whether or not, that creates leverage or some sort of change in which, the war can be then brought to some sort of a conclusion.
And that was exactly my question earlier to Ali as well, Seth, and I want to get your perspective on that. What we heard from Danny Danon as well just a short time ago, he said that that the incentive now is still to finish the war by making sure that Hamas and no more hostages are returned. It's the same war aims that have been there since the 7th of October, isn't it? And I wonder if killing the leadership of Hamas is taking Israel one step closer to saying that they've done the job on that side of it.
I mean, it seems that when it comes to the hostage exchanges that have happened in the past, the address for that is the Hamas leadership that lives in Qatar. So, and that usually has been American pressure from the Trump administration and Steve Witkoff and deals that have been done there. And that seems to be how it's worked. So the ground campaign, the military campaign may create pressure, may end up taking out leaders, but it has not usually resulted in a lot of hostages being freed through military action. And I think the IDF has been very reticent, very cautious to go into areas of the central camps in Gaza, which is, I think, where the 58 hostages, 20 or so of whom are expected to be alive, are held. So I think that creates a catch-22 in which, the military solution is maybe not there to get the hostages out. That seems to have been what the last 19 months has shown.
And this intensification in recent weeks, I mean, Danny Danon had that put to him that, you know, there have been hundreds of civilians that have been killed in recent weeks as this bombing campaign has intensified and the ground offensive has continued. I mean, what is that doing in terms of returning the hostages? I mean, it feels like the same questions every time, Seth. Returning the hostages and bringing a war to an end, the civilian casualties being killed.
Right. I mean, I don't know much about. I haven't seen the civilian casualties data. The IDF has said that around 800 terrorists they believe have been eliminated in the last, I guess, 2 months or so. But again, it's a question in terms of the war goals and the war aims, because those goals have changed a bit. I mean, there's the defeat of Hamas, the defeat of the military and governance of Hamas, getting the hostages home, and now there's the question of this new aid mechanism, and trying to maybe replace Hamas or something like that. So there's so many different layers that the question of trying to resolve all of them becomes more and more complex, I think.
Absolutely. And Seth, it's 600 days that since the 7th of October, which of course is being marked right now. I don't know if you saw the footage from the Knesset just a little while ago, where it seemed once Prime Minister Netanyahu finished speaking, tempers really flared up. I don't know if you know any more about exactly what happened at that point and why there seemed to be such anger in the chamber at that time.
Well, I don't know precise details of that, but I've seen all over Israel today driving around. I mean, you know, people are trying to commemorate the 600 days. I mean, this is just an excruciatingly long time for hostage families to wait for their children or loved ones to come home. And it is now the longest war in Israel's history, as I understand it, since the 1948 War of Independence. So that is something that is not only a long war, but I think the long wait for the hostages is tearing the society apart. And that's what we're seeing, you know, people that want to bring them home as soon as possible.
OK. Seth Ransome from Jerusalem Post. I really do appreciate you making the time to speak to us today, Seth. All the best to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Clark is here, our security and defence analyst. Professor Clark, let's speak first of all about what we heard from Danny Danon, if we can, in the UN there, talking about this aid distribution, saying that some 9,000 tonnes have gone since the 19th of May, but of course leaving out the fact that up to that point there had been a blockade in Gaza for many, many months. I mean, what do you make of this argument being put forward that aid is getting in? Danny Danon actually said it's the UN that needs to stop spreading panic and start delivering aid.
Well, I mean, logistically, it's a real problem. we know there are 4 centres established, 3 of them in the south, 1 in the north, but they don't all seem to be operating at the moment. The ones in the south, I mean, I was looking at this morning at some satellite imagery. They're there, they're set up, you can see the areas. It's not clear that there's very much happening at all 3 of them. And we know there was this tragedy yesterday where people just rushed the area. I mean, logistically, they got a few thousand packs given out yesterday. They say they'll reach 1 million by the end of the week. Well, this is Wednesday. I don't think they're going to do that. And the problem for this aid distribution issue is it's a 3-way standoff.
Sorry to interrupt you, Michael. Yeah. I'm going to take you back to take you viewers back to New York City, to the UN Security Council. Let's listen in. They are discussing
Revising
Gaza.
it requires collective action. Peace cannot be a transaction or a partial, temporary arrangement. It needs to be built on international consensus, legitimacy, moving it from managing the conflict to ending it. Mr. President, Israel has the right to live in peace and security. This was undeniably shaken by the horrific terror attacks and the taking of hostages on the 7th of October by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups. The suffering of the hostages and their families is immense and profound, affecting the entire country. The release of Eden Alexander on May 12th was a welcome but too brief moment of relief. The hostages need to be released unconditionally, and an immediate ceasefire needs to come into effect. Hamas and other armed groups must stop launching rockets towards Israel. Durable security cannot be achieved solely through force. It must be built on mutual recognition, justice, and rights for all. A better path exists that resolves this conflict, de-escalates regional tensions, and achieves a shared vision for peace. The upcoming high-level international conference in June co-chaired by France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, presents a critical opportunity. It must not be another rhetorical exercise. It must launch a path towards ending the occupation and realizing the two-state solution based on international law, UN resolutions, and previous agreements. A path that unifies the West Bank and Gaza and results in a Palestinian state existing in peace and security alongside Israel, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states. We need to pivot ourselves from declarations to decisions. We need to implement rather than adopt new texts. Mr. President, since the resumption of hostilities in Gaza, the already horrific existence of civilians has only sunk further into the abyss. This is man-made. When speaking of our fellow human beings in Gaza, words such as empathy, solidarity, and support have lost their meaning. We should not become accustomed to the number of people killed or injured. These are daughters, mothers, young children whose lives have been shattered. All have a name, all had a future, all had dreams and aspirations. Since the collapse of the ceasefire in March, civilians have constantly come under fire, confined to ever-shrinking spaces and deprived of life-saving relief. Israel must halt its devastating strikes on civilian life and infrastructure. The entire population in Gaza is facing the risk of famine. As the Secretary General has said, families are being starved and denied the very basics. On May 18th, the United Nations was informed by the Israeli authorities of the approval for the resumption of limited aid entry into Gaza. Since then, very limited numbers of goods have entered and have been distributed by the United Nations and its partners. But this is comparable to a lifeboat after the ship has sunk. The United Nations, including UNRWA, will continue to provide humanitarian assistance based on the principles of impartiality and neutrality. We have a plan in line with international humanitarian law and Security Council Resolution 2720. We remain committed to engage with all parties to implement this. We cannot, as has been stated often, participate in any mechanism that violates humanitarian principles. And allow me to reiterate that aid cannot be negotiable, and there can be no question of forced displacement. Civilians in Gaza have lost hope, Mr. President. Instead of saying goodbye, see you tomorrow, Palestinians now say, see you in heaven. Death is their companion. It's not life, it is not hope. Palestinians in Gaza deserve more than survival. They deserve a viable and vibrant future. Ultimately, any sustainable solution for Gaza is political. Agreements and work on post-war arrangements for security and governance should not wait any longer. This includes support for a reformed, revitalized and empowered Palestinian government to govern Gaza and West Bank. And Israel's legitimate security concerns must be met. The region has a vital role to play, with active engagement by the international community. Mr. President, while Gaza rightly captures the world's attention, the West Bank is on a dangerous trajectory. Developments are best described as accelerating de facto annexation through settlement expansion, land seizures, and settler violence. And if not reversed, this will make the two-state solution physically impossible. Israeli security operations in the northern West Bank, particularly in refugee camps, and ensuing armed exchanges have resulted in many Palestinians killed, including children, thousands displaced, and many without home. Attacks by Palestinian militants have also continued, resulting in Israeli civilian casualties, including the death of a pregnant woman. Violence against civilians from any side is never justified. Mr. President, when talking about the occupied Palestinian territory, it is time for the Palestinian leadership to overcome internal divisions and focus on effective and inclusive governance. The Palestinian Authority embodies decades of investment in state building by this very same international community. and the international community needs to continue to support and protect Palestinian institutions. But reforms must continue to ensure the Palestinian Authority's viability, legitimacy towards its own population, and its ability to resume its responsibilities in the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Authority needs to rise to this historic challenge. However, the absence of a political process to end the conflict, coupled with stalled reforms and Israeli economic, administrative and security measures, significantly hamper real-time progress. Mr. President, in closing, I would like to reinforce the following points. 1. Humanitarian aid and assistance urgently need to reach all civilians across Gaza in accordance with international humanitarian law. The UN's position and plan are well known. 2. The people of Gaza cannot afford to wait for the resumption of essential services. Livelihoods and human dignity need to be restored. Early recovery needs to resume immediately. 3. Forced displacement of civilians must unequivocally be rejected and prevented as per international law. Palestinians should be supported to stay on their land. 4. Post-war Palestinian governance and appropriate security arrangements in Gaza are needed that address the needs and rights of Palestinians and legitimate security concerns of Israel. The territorial and political unity of Gaza and the West Bank must be preserved. Fragmentation undermines the prospects for peace and a viable two-state solution. And of course, 6, that can also be point number 1, I'd like to reiterate the unconditional release of hostages and the return of the remains to their families. They need to come home. International engagement and alignment are critical. In the spirit of, to some, a well-known sculpture by Palestinian artist Salman Mansour, 1996, called Palestine Disappearing. I invite you to look it up. We need to act before it is too late. The responsibility lies with the parties and also with us, the international community. We need to act now to reverse the current trajectory. A well-defined, widely supported and time-bound political process accompanied by safeguards and guarantees is essential. Statehood is a right. It is not a reward. Let us not be remembered as the generation that let the two-state solution disappear. Let us be the generation that chose courage over caution, justice over inertia, and peace over politics. Let's be part of the generation that can make this happen. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Mrs. Kak for her briefing. I now give the floor to Dr. Feroz Shitwa. Please.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Council. My name is Dr. Feroz Sidwa. I am an American trauma and critical care surgeon based in Stockton, California. I come before you today to speak about the Gaza Strip, where I have volunteered twice since October 7th. First at European Hospital from March 25th to April 8th of last year, and most recently at Nasser Medical Complex from March 6th to April 1st of 2025. Both are in the city of Khan Yunis. I'm not here as a policymaker or a politician. I'm a physician bearing witness to the deliberate destruction of a healthcare system, the targeting of my own colleagues, and the erasure of a people. The Constitution of the World Health Organization states that the health of all peoples is fundamental to the attainment of peace and security and is dependent on the fullest cooperation of individuals and states. I've taken this to heart, and it is the reason I volunteer in conflict zones from Haiti to Ukraine to Gaza. In Gaza, I operated in hospitals without sterility, electricity, or anesthetics. Surgeries took place on crowded and filthy floors. Children died not because their injuries were unsurvivable, but because we lacked blood, antibiotics, and the most basic supplies that are readily available in any large hospital anywhere else in the world. I did not see or treat a single combatant during my 5 weeks in Gaza. My patients were 6-year-olds with shrapnels in their heart and bullets in their brains, and pregnant women whose pelvises had been obliterated and their fetuses cut in two while still in the womb. Mothers sheltering in the hospital cooked bread on hot plates in the emergency department during mass casualty events, as we dealt with the rain of fire and death falling around us everywhere. Mr. President, the foundations of life in Gaza, family, health, and community, have been shattered. The medical system has not failed. It has been systematically dismantled through a sustained military campaign that has willfully violated international humanitarian law. Civilians are now dying not just from the constant airstrikes, but from acute malnutrition, sepsis, exposure, and despair. Between my 2 visits to Gaza, I witnessed a sharp decline in patients' health, driven not just by injury, but by worsening hunger and malnutrition that left their bodies weaker, their wounds slower to heal, and their survival far less certain. And let's not forget, this is a man-made catastrophe. It is entirely preventable. Participating in it or not, allowing it to happen is a choice. This is a deliberate denial of conditions necessary for life: food, shelter, water, and medicine. Preventing genocide means refusing to normalize these atrocities. It means refusing to dehumanize the Palestinians, to refuse to see them as calories counted or numbers of trucks moved. We see now that this way of thinking has brought about a human dignity crisis, with an entire people on the edge of survival. On March 18th, the ceasefire was violated by Israel. That day, I witnessed the most extreme mass casualty event of my career at Nasser Medical Complex. 221 trauma patients arrived in one morning. 90 were dead on arrival. Nearly half were severely injured children. No health system on earth could cope with this, least of all one that is besieged and starved of supplies. Hospitals are meant to be sanctuaries. Healthcare workers and first responders are supposed to be protected. Children are supposed to be protected. In Gaza, these protections are simply gone. Every day, the distinction between combatant and civilian is erased. Most of my patients were preteen children, their bodies shattered by explosives and torn by flying metal. Many died. Those who lived often awoke to find their entire families gone. Last year, I published in the New York Times a survey of 65 American healthcare workers who had served in Gaza. 83% of them reported seeing children shot in the head or the chest. I personally treated 13 such cases in my 2 weeks at European Hospital. According to the War Child Alliance, nearly half of Gaza's children are suicidal. They ask, why didn't I die with my sister, my mother, my father? Not out of extremism, but out of unbearable grief. I wonder if any member of this council has ever met a 5-year-old child who no longer wants to live, let alone imagined a society in which so many young children feel this way. And what astonishes me is not that some children in Gaza have lost the will to live, but that any still cling to hope. My Palestinian friends, mostly healthcare workers, no longer speak of resilience or even survival. Parents memorize their children's clothing in case they must identify their remains later. They pray for one piece of bread to give them before they sleep so that their children might die less hungry if they are killed at night. And meanwhile, my Israeli and American friends express horror at what is being done in their names. Many of us cannot understand how our governments continue to arm this senseless destruction, but you in this chamber have the power to stop it. Mr. President, I am here because I have witnessed what is happening in Gaza with my own eyes, especially to children, and I cannot pretend not to have seen it. You too cannot claim ignorance. I urge the Council, and especially my own government, to act with urgency on these enforceable measures. 1, demand an immediate and permanent ceasefire, including a halt to all arms transfers to all parties to the conflict, alongside targeted and lawful sanctions on Israel. 2, demand the reopening of all of Gaza's crossings and guarantee unrestricted medical evacuations, including to hospitals in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, where Palestinian patients can be treated by Palestinian doctors, with safe return to Gaza assured. 3, guarantee sustained humanitarian access throughout Gaza, allowing all essential supplies, shelter, food, water, fuel, and medical supplies, to reach all people in need. 4, strongly and explicitly reject the weaponization and politicization of aid embodied by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, whose executive director, a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps, publicly resigned on Sunday, citing the foundation's lack of adherence to humanitarian principles. We must affirm support for existing UN mechanisms, back UNRWA, and ensure NGOs with expertise in reaching and providing specialized care to those in need have unimpeded full access. 5, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. 6, the immediate and unconditional release of all healthcare workers, including Dr. Hussam Abu Sufia, now held in Israeli detention for more than 150 days. And 7, without delay, uphold the UN Charter and act now to prevent genocide. One day, Gaza survivors may have a record of the empty promises made by the members of this council as their wounds deepened and their lives were lost. If this council remains silent and fails to act now, that record will stand as a testament to a global failure to provide urgent care and to the collapse of our collective conscience. I'm pleading with you to do what you were entrusted to do, to protect international peace and security, and to prevent irreversible harm. The steps I mentioned are the very least that is needed. I'm asking my own government's representative to hear the voices of the majority of Americans who are calling for the same. If this continues, there will be no Palestinian doctors left, no one to care for the sick and wounded. There will be no Palestinians left to rebuild the healthcare system. We are losing a generation before our eyes, condemning people to die of hunger, disease, and despair, deaths that could be easily prevented. Thank you.
I thank Dr. Sinwar for his briefing, and I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. And I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Coordinator COG and Dr. Sinwar, for your briefings. First, let me express condolences on the tragic murders of Israeli embassy officials Yaron Lachinsky and Sarah Milgram, an American citizen, at a Jewish community event last week in Washington. Yaron and Sarah were murdered for no other reason than the assailant wanted to kill Jews. It is horrific and shameful. We can and must do better to combat the sickening rise of anti-Semitism around the world. May their memories be a blessing. I think it's worth noting Yaron's final post before his murder on the social media platform X addressed anti-Semitism at the UN. Specifically, it condemned Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs Tom Fletcher for spreading anti-Semitic lies. When he addressed this council on May 13th, Under-Secretary General Fletcher used language invoking the charge of genocide against Israel. Last week, he claimed that 14,000 babies were about to die within 48 hours, an abject falsehood. These kinds of remarks are absolutely unacceptable for an official in his position. Last week, Yaron and Sarah were murdered simply for attending an event for young Jews. The irony? The event discussed finding ways to bring aid to Gaza. But that didn't matter. They were targeted because of who they were. The United States has been working tirelessly to free the hostages and bring this war to an end, one that Hamas brutally started. Yet in the most delicate of moments, some member states remain unwilling to condemn the terror group responsible. Forget that these actions endanger hostages. The actual outcome is condemning civilians in Gaza to remain under Hamas's control for another generation. For our part, the United States will continue its effort to bring about a diplomatic agreement that will free the hostages. Hamas continues to reject proposals from the United States, Qatar, and Egypt that would release the 58 remaining hostages who have now been cruelly held for 600 days and bring calm to Gaza. Every day, Hamas demonstrates its lack of regard for the Palestinians it claims to represent, all while it violently suppresses protests against its barbaric rule and diverts aid meant for civilians. The United States fully stands behind Israel and its right to defend itself. In order to move forward, Hamas must be defeated. As Secretary Rubio has said, if an ember survives, it will spark again into a fire. There can be no peaceful and prosperous Gaza as long as Hamas governs it by force. The Council should apply pressure on Hamas to disarm, leave, and free Palestinians in Gaza from Hamas's tyranny. Shielding Hamas from accountability only undermines Israel's security and prolongs Palestinian anguish. Hamas must release the hostages immediately, including the bodies of the 4 murdered Americans it continues to hold: Itai Hen, Gadi Huggy, Judy Weinstein Huggy, and Omer Nutra. We will not rest until every hostage has been returned from Gaza. Let us be clear. This council should be supporting the work of the negotiators. The United States supports getting assistance to civilians in Gaza in a way that does not allow Hamas to benefit. We support the new initiative to resume the flow of aid through pre-existing mechanisms in advance of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation's mechanism becoming fully operational. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is an independent entity established to provide a secure mechanism for the delivery of aid directly to those in need. We call on the UN to work with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and Israel to reach agreements on how to operationalize this system in a way that works for all. One that provides the opportunity to deliver aid directly to civilians without diversion by Hamas and other terrorist and criminal groups. The United States will support a future for the people of Gaza that is free of Hamas and full of opportunity. As President Trump emphasized during his recent visit, before our eyes, a new generation of leaders is transcending the ancient conflicts and tired divisions of the past and forging a future where the Middle East is defined by commerce, not chaos, where it exports technology, not terrorism, and where people of different nations, religions, and creeds are building cities together. The United States will do its part to help forge this new reality alongside Israel and our Arab partners. But at the same time, the United States stands with Israel in unequivocally rejecting any effort to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state or impose conditions on Israel which would be an unconscionable reward for the heinous Hamas attack on Israel that massacred and brutally kidnapped Israelis and Americans. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for his statement, and now I give the floor to the permanent representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank Ms. Sigrid Skag and Dr. Feroz Sinwar for their statement.
Okay, we're going to step away for a moment from the UN Security Council. We've heard from the US representative to the United Nations saying that the United States stands firmly behind Israel, and towards the end of his statement there saying that the United States will not recognise a Palestinian state, as they would see that as a reward for the Hamas attacks on the 7th of October. We also heard from Dr. Feroz Sinwar, a trauma surgeon who's been working in Gaza, who said that he's a witness to the destruction of the healthcare system there, a systematic destruction, he said, dismantled by the Israeli campaign. He made a plea to those in the Security Council to protect international law, peace and security and bring an end to the war in Gaza. And the first person we heard from was Sigrid Skag. She is the Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, and her statement outlined exactly what the UN was trying to do to bring about peace in the region. She called for aid to be given to all civilians, saying that Gazans cannot wait. She said that forced displacement in Gaza must come to an end, and there must be the unconditional release of the hostages and a return of the remains of those who've been killed by Hamas to their families. Ms. Karg also said that the aid that's currently being distributed by Israel in Gaza is not enough. She said it's a lifeboat at a time when there has been a flood. She said that civilians in Gaza now say, rather than see you tomorrow, see you in hell. She said the only way to bring this to an end was to get back on the path to a two-state solution, that Israel must stop attacks on civilians. All right, we'll keep an eye on what's happening in the Security Council, of course, throughout the afternoon here on Sky News Today.